Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board.
Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing.
Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Shurick, and with my fantastic co-host Stacey Wedding, we're here to talk about nonprofit stuff. So the way this works is you send us questions. You can do that at the nonprofiteverything.com webpage, where you'll also find show notes, by the way. There's a nice big button to click that says Ask a Question, or you can email us at questions@nonprofiteverything.com. We love to get questions from our listeners. We also love it when our listeners share the podcast with other folks. That's the way people find out about it. We don't really do any other advertising or any other way to get it out there. So the only way it gets out there is the word of mouth. So if you can help us with that, we would really enjoy it. Thanks again for listening. And with that, we're going to jump right into today's episode. Our board has several representatives from a particular industry, and their influence has helped us raise significant grant and sponsorship dollars over the years. Several of these board members are leaving their current positions and moving to different sectors or even retiring. How do we handle this when one of the main reasons we invited them to be part of the board was because of their influence on funding decisions with the industry they work in? Do we just keep adding new board members in the industries we need support from and then keep these other board members who are no longer have access to the funding we need from that industry?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers here. And I think that it's a very typical challenge. I hear a lot of nonprofits talk about this, right? They're like, oh my gosh, we need the X, I'm just going to pick on bankers. We always tend to pick on bankers, right? Like we need all the bankers because the banks give and they have CRA and all this stuff, right? And then you get a bunch of people leaving that industry and now you're like, oh my gosh, like did our funding just kind of disappear with that? I think this speaks to a few different ways of strategically thinking about board composition. One, diversity. Because when you are too lopsided or heavy in one particular industry, and maybe that industry crashes, or maybe that industry is just struggling, that probably is going to impact your board and the giving from your board if that takes place. So you've got to think about, how do we diversify so we don't have all these people from the same industry? I also think, I don't know if this, if you just keep adding, you're going to have a huge board, right? Like you're just like, oh, well, okay, you're no longer there. Let's just keep adding board members. I don't know if that's the solution either. I mean, one of the key questions is, hopefully you have built a relationship beyond just that board member. I understand that board members have a lot of influence, sometimes depending on what level of the company they sit in, but how do you then do the handoff, or how do you make sure you're building the relationship beyond just that board member seat is another piece. And you've got to look at this, like any board member you're bringing on, I'm hoping you're not bringing them on just for the money grab, right? Because I think it's got to be larger than that. That can be a piece of it. But if you're bringing board members on, you have to be well aware that any of them at any point could leave their company, could retire, could whatever. And you need the board member that's holistic, right? They're going to serve several purposes for you, not just bringing you the money. I mean, that could be an important purpose, but not just that. So you feel like, when you boil it down, diversity of board members, making sure you really think about kind of the whole person, the whole board member beyond just the money. And let's be honest, maybe they can still give you, maybe they don't do it through their company anymore, but if you have a give-get policy where you've got to raise X number of dollars from each board member has to either give or fundraise X number of dollars, then you have that conversation with that board member as they're transitioning. Are you still going to be able to meet that commitment? Is there a way that we can still make this work? Because that's one of our requirements. So some of this is structural. Some of it, I think, is just more of a strategic, how you're building a board so that it can optimize on all levels. So I think that the answer is not, and not necessarily that, oh, you're gone, you just retired from X company, you're booted off the board. Like, that's not cool either, right? So, I mean, so the reality is you're more than just your company. You are a person, an intellect. You hopefully, like, you might be able to actually still have influence even if you're not working at that company anymore, depending on what line of work you are going into. So I think there's a whole lot of questions, like, that it's not just, oh, great, now we got to find someone else at their company to replace them. I mean, sure, they could help you think through that, but how do you make sure you're kind of honoring that person as a full person and not just a wallet?
I think that's a really interesting point. And you see, I mean, I'd be interested to hear your opinion, Stacey. Like, we talk about like a board matrix where you've got, and it becomes this multi-dimensional thing where, what does this board member represent? What boxes does this board member tick for us that we need? And that always seemed kind of reductive to me. Just, I mean, I like the process because then it says, okay, we've got a hole in this area. We're missing someone with these qualities. But it always seemed really reductive in that if somebody's on the board and the sole purpose that they're on the board is because they work for a particular industry that happens to cut us a check, or they work for a corporation that happens to cut us a check, I mean, that's, number one, sort of disrespectful to that board member, because you're right. Like, I'm a human being. I'm not just I'm just not an avatar for the banking sector. So how does this fold into like developing board members and teaching them and helping them understand what their actual responsibilities are beyond just the way to get a check?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to being super clear about what is it that your organization needs on all levels, not just monetarily, right? And so maybe you're looking for expertise in a certain area. Maybe you're looking for someone who can open doors for new partnerships, for your clients and those you serve. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. Maybe you're like, oh my gosh, we need these kinds of connections, this kind of expertise. We need strategic thinkers. So like, I just think you've got to look at it, both the soft and hard stuff, like the soft skills, as well as kind of the industry types of things, because you don't want a board. It kind of diminishes the whole point of a board. Like, I was thinking about this related to an organization I work with. They have 3 people on their board. It's like a board of 7, and there's 3 all from the same company. But it's a really large company with different divisions and different sort of pockets of influence. And so for them, that made sense. So it's kind of not always this really easy black and white picture, but how do we look at the full picture? And then, how do we, when a board member comes on, say, listen, here's our expectations of you, but this is how we really want you to, like, here's how you can engage with us. Here's why we're asking for you to serve on this board. Yes, you have connections to this industry. Yes, we hope that there may be some monetary, support as a result of that. And we also would love, we know you are known in this community for X, or you really have a way of thinking that we think could really mix things up on our board. So it's really goes back to that intentionality when you're recruiting, and then being super clear about it with the board members, so they also don't feel like they're just there to write the check, which we oftentimes joke about, right? Because then you just have an absentee board member who just sends you their check, doesn't challenge, ask any questions, help you think strategically about things, and that's not working either. So it's part recruitment and intentional recruitment, and part education, I think, and just being clear. Like, I'm always shocked. Like, when I've been asked to serve on a board before, and I say to them, so what is it? Why me? It's amazing how many times people don't know how to answer that. Like, right? And so I'm like, did you not have any discussion about this? Was it like, and then, you get 5 different board members who would all say 5 different answers for why Stacey. And that's, I don't know, like, strategically, why me? There's only so many spots you have available to fill. So how are you going to do that really smartly and strategically? So does that answer your question, Andy?
Yeah. I mean, I think at some level, I feel like this is one of those things where Andy and Stacey say one thing, and reality might actually be different. Because there's so many organizations that I've experienced or worked with or been part of where like it's nobody ever asks, like somebody says, oh, we need to have this person because they work for this company, right? Or we need to have this person because they are responsible for getting the money from this foundation, right? And then everybody goes, yeah. And then that person gets on the board and there's no further discussion beyond like, why isn't that a good idea? Are there other ways that we can engage with this company or this foundation or this industry that doesn't involve like dragging some poor person who has no intention of participating onto the board? And we do it simply because it's easier. We feel like it's just like, well, if we get that person on, at least they're inside instead of outside, and that makes it easier for us. But board, I don't know, when we're looking at developing boards, like one of the things that you said, I think is like really important, but I don't think anybody does it, which is like bringing somebody on that's going to like challenge you. Somebody that's going to bring new ideas and like say, well, why are we doing it that way? Like that's, as an ED, like the last thing you want is somebody who's going to walk in and be like, why are you doing it that way? And you're like, oh my God, shut up. Like, please don't ask that question because I don't have the time or energy to answer you. Right. So I mean, is there a really compelling reason that you would say that this is why you should try to get board members that are challenging and not go for the easy win with, well, if we've got them on the board, we're more likely to get the check. If they're not on the board, we're less likely to get the check. I mean, I feel like most EDs in that situation would be like, we'll go for the check, or like, let's not, like, I don't want anybody challenging me. Let's go for the check.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I totally get it. And I probably would be the same way, right? If I were that ED, to your point, right? I'd probably be like, oh, just the person who's not going to make my life more complicated. It's complicated enough. And I think when it is done around perhaps a set of, I go back to core values, right? What are the core values of our organization? And making sure board members who come on are aligned with those core values first and foremost. And then from there, knowing we have that commonality, knowing that the challenge is coming from a place where the questions are coming from a place of integrity and not just trying to be difficult, but sort of helping to elevate the thinking, or saying, could we imagine for a minute if we did it like this? Or like, I think it goes back to all the studies on diversity, right? Diverse thinking leads to better quality decisions and decisions that think about all of it. So if you're truly looking for thought partnership on your board, then recruit for that. If you really, and just be honest about it, right? If that's not at all what you want, I mean, I would argue I think it actually can really elevate. It takes more time, it takes more energy, all the things you said. But just be clear, like if that's not at all what you want and it's truly about the money, then the conversation is a lot different, right? It's about, we need to get into this industry. We know you're a lead influencer in this industry. We know we can get, it sounds like you have monetary capacity in this industry. Can we also have a backup plan that if you were to leave this industry, like how do we make sure we are entrenched in it so that if you leave? So like, I think the conversation shifts. If that truly is your motivator, like that sort of feels soul sucking to me and sad, like saying that, because it just feels so simple, so like simple-minded, right? I don't know. And yet I get it, right? So like there is the reality of day-to-day work. And then there's also I mean, I will say this. I don't know if all EDs, I don't want to cast a shadow on all EDs. There are a few organizations I've worked with over the years that the EDs like, I just want the board to ask a question. I just want the board to say, what was the thinking behind why we did this? Not like coming from a confrontational, I'm ready to like arm wrestle you about it, but trying to understand because they care enough. Because when you challenge and when you ask those hard questions, it's because you care. And the people who just sit there silent, you kind of go, okay, this just doesn't feel like what a board is supposed to be or what could be.
I'm on the staff of a smaller nonprofit and was recently asked by my boss to create a one-sheeter to share more about who we are and what we do. When I asked her for more details, she told me to figure it out and that she wasn't sure how to structure it. She said she just heard many organizations talk about their one-sheeters, so she feels like we need one too. Can you give me some advice on what to include in this document that people can't already find on our website? And is this really as big a deal as my boss seems to think it is?
Oh my, oh my. Oh, Andy. I don't want to come down harsh on the boss. And yet I'm kind of like, thanks a lot, boss, for having, oh, they're doing it. Oh, they jumped off a bridge, so let's us do it too. It kind of feels like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, okay. This isn't about trying to necessarily manage your boss, although I do think it's worth some key questions. Like, if I were in your shoes, so a couple of things that to arm you with, but I would highly encourage going back and having a conversation with your boss, right? Perhaps there are examples online. If you just, type in whatever, one page nonprofit marketing sheet, you'll probably get more than you know what to do with. And I'm not saying those are good ones, but like you can see that there's different types of formats. I mean, it goes down to the really simple question of what are you trying to communicate, right? What is our intention for this piece? Is this for anybody and everyone? Is this a general piece? Is this something that is kind of like a teaser piece to try to invite people or, intrigue people enough that they want to get more involved? So I think being super clear about that intention and the communication, you can even come forward to your boss with a recommendation. I would hate to see you build out something that then the boss, because they didn't take the time to really think through this to begin with, then was like, no, you're off point. So like, I think you could come back and say, here's what I think could really help us with this one sheeter. And so back to that, like when I've seen one pagers that work, right, it's great to sort of like, it's that sort of add-on. Someone comes and if they're visiting your organization, and it's not like they are pulling up necessarily your website right there. You just kind of give, this one sheeter as a way to kind of provide this tool for those who need to see things, not always just hear them, right? See some of those key highlights about your organization, talking, it could be everything from potential partners, funders, volunteers. Like I could see it. I would almost keep it a little bit more general about the organization as a whole and try to do it in a way that it isn't just a replication of what's on your website, to your point, right? Or there's some different pieces that you might be able to pull out that maybe your website doesn't. So one of the things I always say is thinking about, what are the three most compelling things about your organization, right? What are those things you brag about? Like asking like around the team, or what are the things that we are super proud of? Well, like that should go on your one pager. Having some of that kind of basic like info just about, maybe it's your mission statement, maybe it's a few stats on numbers, if you have that, of what you've served, kind of that sneak peek, why your work is needed, right? Why do you exist? Why is your work needed? Not necessarily getting into the whole laundry list like websites often do. Here's all of our programs and services, and here's all the details on those. You have very little like real estate on this one pager to communicate a handful of key things, which is why I think it should be almost like a piece that someone goes, wow, I walked away. I know a little bit more about what the need is, why they exist, what they're trying to serve. And like, wow, they also there's some quick credentials you could put on there. So for example, if you have a few really large funders that are noteworthy, that those names sometimes pull some weight and have some gravitas, like doing that, putting those on there. Maybe you've gotten certifications from Charity Navigator or GuideStar or one of these, maybe there's some things like that, like we've got the gold seal or whatever it is, things that at just a quick glance I can go, wow, this organization is legitimate, and they just they're doing enough stuff that I'm intrigued to maybe learn more. So maybe at that point you even pull me on to like, now I want to research and learn more after I've connected with you. So maybe I check out your website or your social or whatever. So I think it's kind of a bit of a like a hook, like an intro piece that just is a bit of a like it teases it out a little bit. I think a powerful quote from a beneficiary can always be good on these pieces. And then like if you have photos are really important if it's the right kind of photo. So you see these types of things where people just put these random photos, but unless your photo really shows your work in action and it's a high quality photo, don't put it on there. Like, so like, I think the kind of the gold standards with any of this stuff, make sure it's easy to read, make sure it's jargon free. It shows that you're a legitimate organization and you have some, right, like things to be proud of. It's attractively formatted. So don't try to do this in-house. There's some sites that offer really good rates. And there's some, there's places, there's people there's graphic designers and others who might lend those services, or someone on your board who might have a marketing person that is great at laying something out. You want this to look professional because this is kind of your, hey, look at us. We want to inspire you. So those are just a handful of things. But at the end of the day, don't design all of this without first going back with some clarity. Like, I know your boss was like, go off and do it. Like, I think you could easily go back and say, listen, I've given some thought, I've done some research, here's some ideas I have, but I really want to make sure we are on the right page, because there needs to be that clarity, or else you're going to design this piece and no one's going to use it, right? Your boss isn't going to use it because they're not even sure what it's used, what the point of it is. They just know that everyone else is doing it. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I may be coming down harsh on your boss, but I feel bad you didn't get more direction with this project.
This is funny because this is one of those things where like everything Stacey said was correct. However, right?
Do you not think it's realistic,
No,
Andy?
I just think I'm putting on my CFO hat for a second. Like my response back would be, what's the purpose of this thing? Like, why? Let's try not to spend any energy and effort on something that has no purpose. Like, just because you feel like you should have one is not enough reason to have one. Like, what you got to know what it's for. Like, who's going to take it? What person is going to have it? What are they going to use it for? Otherwise, you might as well just light some money on fire to keep yourself warm. That's the only value for this kind of thing. If it were me and somebody asked me this sort of non-specific, random, can you make me a thing that sounds like a thing I might want? I think that's like a perfect use case for an AI content generator. And you say, hey, look at my website. Can you generate me a one-pager? See whatever garbage gets spit out, correct it so that it's not wrong, and email it back to your boss and says, here you go. And they get back to work that's actually got some benefit to your organization. I mean, this is just nothing but nonsense, noise, and busy work. I wouldn't get anywhere near it. I would not even touch it with a 10-foot pole. It's a waste of your time.
Do you see value, though, Andy, in
there's a purpose
how
to it. I see
one-sheeter, yeah.
Yeah, so there's lots of things that you need to have, right? Your board needs to understand your organization deeply, but they also are very stupid people who need to be reminded constantly about what it is you do, right? And so they're constantly asking you for the elevator speech. I know we've answered this question a half a dozen times before, right?
Yeah.
They need to know what the salient facts for your organization are. They need it in a laminated card that they can keep in their pocketbook so that they can pull it out and talk it to their lunch friends about their organization that they're about to ask them for money. Like there's certain things that have practical utility. Like a one-sheeter, like that tells me that you want it to be about 250 words. That's like the only and it has to be about my organization. That's not enough information to like do anything that's got any value at all. Like, so if you tell me what it's for, like, are we going to a trade show with like a whole bunch of other nonprofits and we've just got material that people are going to put in their bags and throw away later? Okay, at least I know what it's for then. Is this something that we're going to have at the front desk? So if somebody wanders in off the street and says, what is it that you do? You can hand them this thing. Like, okay, that at least has a purpose. So you got to come up with some reason for it to exist so you can know how to design whatever it's saying around that thing. Because to your point, like all the things you said, Stacey, were exactly right. Like, don't put a picture of like two people shaking hands on it. That's completely like the most useless piece of clip art you can find, right? Like, don't do that, like, because it has to have some reason for existing. And so until you find out what the reason for its existence is, you're doing nothing other than wasting your time staring at a blinking cursor in Word.
Do you think, I guess so I agree with all that. And what I'm imagining, because we see this happen all the time, right? Everyone's busy. The boss is like, I think we need this thing like that I'm seeing. They met someone else a week ago and they got this one sheeter. So now they're like, ooh, like others are doing this one sheeter. So it's sort of this quick thing. I mean, I think asking the questions there is important. I also think, though, there could be some value with the employee if I were in those shoes and my boss didn't seem like they wanted to spend time on it that day, I would give probably more thought maybe than what you would, because I would probably think about like, is there a practical use? Like, do I know of anything our organization does where this could actually be a helpful resource or tool? Like, to go back and then have more of a conversation where I did a little bit of the thinking for my boss, because I know the boss is juggling 100 things. Like, so I guess I'm sitting there going, I think it is really the boss should be clarifying it. But if they aren't, like, how do we lead the boss there and manage up a little bit? Like, hey, boss, we really need to be clear on this before we design this. So like going back at a time that's less busy, here's a few things I was thinking of, but would really love your thoughts. Like, I don't know. Do you feel like that's giving like boss a hall pass by doing that?
I don't know. I mean, this is me too, is like I have exactly zero deference to people that are in positions of authority over me too, right? So if somebody comes to me with like a nonsense job, like I'm very likely to say, can you explain more about what that's for? Like, I don't understand what you're asking me. I'm like, I can be deeply stupid if I think what you're asking me for is a waste of time. So that's probably not a great reflection on like how I'm managed. Like if someone's trying to manage me, that probably comes across as very irritating. But we just like in the nonprofit sector, just in general, like there is nobody that works for a nonprofit that thinks I am out of things to do. I wish someone would assign me a task with no value. Like nobody. Like, and some of the best marketers that I ever worked with in nonprofits made everybody mad all the time because they said no. Someone say, can you do this for me? And they'd say, okay, great. I've got time next September to work on that. Like, and then that puts the list of priorities becomes very clear, because if I can wait until next September, like, then it's probably not useful at all. And if it's important enough to get to the top of the stack, like the marketer will say, wow, that's really important. I can see why I need to move everything back so that I can get whatever you just asked me for done. So that tells me that, this organization in general, I mean, it says small nonprofit, which means that there's lots of work that's not being done. So why are we doing something that has no utility? That seems to me like an opportunity to not go back to the boss and say, what do you want me to do again? But to go back to the boss and say, what do you want me to do that actually like has a purpose? Like, let's think about what we need as an organization, because it's probably not a unspecified piece of marketing material that's going to cost money and get thrown in the trash. Let's not do that. Let's do something else.
I think that is super fair. And I also want to say that I think that this feels similar to me, because I think this comparison trap, or this trap of everyone else is doing it, so we need to be doing it, is really something probably a lot of organizations, but nonprofits in particular, are guilty of, right? They go to, you and I've talked about this on podcasts where we've talked about special events, where you go, oh yeah, let's do a gala, let's do that event, because these 10 other organizations are doing it. And so I think that just the bottom line here is be more intentional. Like you have limited resources, so be intentional with what you're doing. And unless there is a clear purpose, or it makes sense strategically with your, all the other stuff in your organization and your strengths and where you're headed, then great. And if not, then guess what? That gets put on hold.
Thanks again for listening. We really appreciate that you've taken the time out of your day to stream the podcast. Stacey and I really appreciate your questions. We appreciate your feedback. If you go to the show notes page, there's a couple of places where you can leave reviews. That helps us grow the podcast too. I know that's not your responsibility, but we'd love it if you could help us out. Thanks a lot. Happy New Year.